Network Automation Nerds podcast.
Hello and welcome to Network Automation Nerds podcast, a podcast about network automation, network engineering, Python, and a whole lot of other interesting technology topics. I'm your host, Eric Cho. Today on the show, we'll be talking to Danny Wade, also known as DevNet Dan on Twitter. I have known Danny for a while. He was the co-host for episode 11 with John Carter. We talked about, Visual Studio Code, live sharing, and some of the other interesting stuff on the landscape of network engineering. So I've also chatted with him on Twitter, Cisco Champion, WebEx channels, and a few other places. And today we'll be talking to Danny about his network engineering path and his own experience with the DevNet certifications. I am super excited to have Danny on the show today, and I know we'll have a great time chatting. So let's dive right in. Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Hey, Eric, how are you?
I am good. It's been a while, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me on your show. And also, congratulations on your newest edition of your fourth edition, of Mastering Python Networking. That's a great milestone, and I think that's kind of how I got my start. So I think it's great that you're continuing and releasing new editions.
Oh, thank you. Just for the record, I didn't pay you to say that, right?
No, you did not. I slipped that in. That was not part of the script.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you regardless, though. Yeah, I
Yeah.
always appreciate the kind words. And like this edition is actually a little bit more difficult than the previous three, only because of the time constraint. I've taken a lot more projects, and I was trying to think really hard of reasons not to do it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's just like, okay, what has changed, and is there warrant? And at the end of the day, it's like, yes, there's a lot of more stuff going on, and there are things that in the previous edition that I thought it would be better if we change it, like shorten some chapters and added new stuff. Like, I don't know about you, but I think the most significant change that's been in the last maybe 2 or 3 years is Docker.
Yep.
Like Docker's always been around and has always been prevalent in DevOps, but I think lately it's been making its way to network engineering a lot more than previously. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I've dove into Docker, a little bit of Kubernetes with some studying and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's just easier to ship applications. And realistically, I know there's a whole monolithic versus containerized distributed application. But for network engineers, most of the time, we're building smaller applications that we really only need a small footprint for, whether that be a web app, something that you can communicate over with a CLI application. And I think Docker is the perfect tool for that distribution.
Yeah, but Docker has its own, also like you mentioned Kubernetes, and they have their own like just all these little stuff that doesn't may or may not be intuitive, right? So how did you how did you go about learning Docker? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of the very first time I experienced or even heard about Docker.
You didn't run Docker on the network gear, right?
No. I believe I did try it in like a lab environment when the Catalyst 9000 or 9300 came out. But no, I didn't turn my switch into a Minecraft server or anything crazy like that.
Oh yeah, you heard about that too,
yeah. I read the Cisco blog when the switches first came out. But no, I think the very first time I actually used and kind of built an application was a basic Flask application,
Nice.
a basic API. And just really toying around with it, seeing, what you could do with the tool. And it's very interesting. I mean, we could go on and on about Docker, and Kubernetes is a whole other, once you experience Docker, you're like, oh, so this is what Kubernetes is. You quickly figure out it's not a competitor with Docker, but it's a whole other beast of its own.
Yeah. No, you're right. I got too excited just talking about all these technology because it's very rare that I get to geek out on network engineering nowadays. So I just
Mhm.
got too excited. But let's like go back. Let's just go like pull us back into the beginning and Dan, just tell us how a little bit about how you got into technology. What was your like origin story?
Yeah. So I think to go all the way back to the very beginning, it all started with figuring out how to remove viruses from the family computer. So removing viruses on the family computer, and that was more or less, hey, we have a problem, figure out how to solve it.
Yeah.
But then my real interest came when I built my own PC, and that was early high school ish. That was real interesting because it's kind of like grown up Lego pieces in a way. You figure out what CPU to buy, what motherboard to buy, how it all connects. So that was really interesting, and that obviously led into kind of my first help desk job and starting there, and then kind of now I'm into the networking space.
Did you like go through a kind of a website that's a drag and drop and say, "Oh, okay, for this motherboard, you can have compatible CPU this, and then like these are the memory cards that you do," or you just went and sourced all of that yourself?
Yeah, so I went through Newegg, a
Yeah,
popular site. Yeah, so I did it all myself. I did the
yeah,
homework and figured it all out. And then afterwards, I found out about PC Part Picker, which is a website that, like you just said, you drag and drop and it shows you the compatibility and everything like that. But no, my originally I went through, figured out like the socket type and figured out how much, the RAM, the type, the speeds of the RAM I could put in the motherboard. So I took the hard road.
yeah. I mean, then that's a great way to learn, right? Like, I think I uh, I started out with just like click and drop, and like I was never a big hardware guy. And so like I'm okay with just having the spec and then whatever within the budget. I think for Newegg you can even set your price range and then they'll
Hmm.
be like, okay, within $500, this is like the best you could get, or
Yep.
the most RAM or whatever you could get.
Yeah. Yep. That's the only filter I used was how much was it going to cost?
Yeah. Oh, same here, right? I still use that filter if I were to build a something, but nowadays it's like nothing comes, you know, uh, I guess a la carte. Everything, like even the MacBook I'm using, like it's like solder on, right? Like all the
Oh, yeah.
drives and SD hard drives, and then all the RAMs are just solder on the logic board. So it's just like it takes the fun away a little bit.
Yep. Yep. It, yeah, I'm kind of to the point though, because after building my own, helped a couple friends, and then while I was working at the help desk level, it was actually really a computer repair shop. So it was a little mix of help desk, but then also fixing computers, and we actually had a few custom build orders come in. So I did those as well, and so I'm kind of to the point where I'm like, I just need it to work. So the MacBook, like I have a MacBook, and yeah, I just want it to work, right? So
Yeah.
I'm kind of to that point. I'm out of the enthusiast side of the custom PC world.
Yeah, and I think that's the same token about like running Linux on your work laptop or your laptop, right? Like
Yeah,
Linux is great for running servers and so on, but a lot of times when you're on the PC that you do on a daily basis, you just want the browser to work. When you want to
yeah,
stream something, you don't want to go download 10,000 plugins. So it's
yep,
just like it's just like kind of a romantic idea to run Linux on your day-to-day workstation, to me,
yep.
and like you said, you just want it to work. So from that help desk job, how did you get into networking? Because that's not very directly related, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I went through I've kind of working as I went through college, and then my junior year of college, I actually got an internship, and that's kind of where things kicked off, right? So it was kind of advertised as an IT internship,
Hmm.
and so you met with multiple managers of different teams. So whether it be your system side, networking, they kind of, not necessarily a help desk, but kind of that more customer service facing role. They had a,
Right.
a manager of that. So I kind of met with each one, and I personally didn't know the difference between them. I kind of just saw them all as, you guys are all tech people. So whatever, when you're trying to get an internship, you didn't really care.
No.
But when I met, I really connected with one guy, and he actually was the manager of the networking team. And so, went through that, and I got contacted and said, hey, we would like to work with you. Would you rather work with this team or this team? And I was like, well, me and this guy connected. And so that's kind of how it sparked. I ended up interning over the summer, about 3 months, with the network team, and they were in charge of a global network. So I kind of I was just figuring out the OSI model, right? So it
Yeah.
took a lot. I mean, I went from zero, like I was drinking from the fire hose, right?
Yeah.
The whole
Yeah.
time. There was every day was like, because they went from building out networks, designing them, to troubleshooting issues as they came in. And so it was an awesome summer. That's kind of where I got my love for networking, and ever since then, it's kind of just fast forward to today.
Yeah, no, like that's so similar to how I got my start too. I started as an intern on the local, like a tier two ISP. And like you said, it's like different teams, except like I think we also have like a tools team. So it's like system engineering, network engineering, and then like tools. And then except I think the reason for me to pick network engineering over systems wasn't because of like I particularly clicked to the guy, which is awesome by the way for you. But for me, it was just like it was during the time when there's a lot of outsourcing going on. So there's during the dot-com bubble burst, and then they were outsourcing a lot of the jobs overseas. And so I look at these two jobs and I'm like, okay, which one's harder to replace? It's like,
Oh,
okay,
okay. Yeah.
somebody would always need to go rack and stack, because back then it was like physical connection. There's no cloud, right? So you
Yeah.
still have to like buy the gear and configure them. So that's how I got started. But it's so awesome that that you got to do the internship, which by the way was awesome, right? Like you just if you're in school, just do as much internship as possible, just to at least you could figure out what you don't want to do.
Yeah, and that's actually a good way to look at it, right? What you don't want to do. But and this is kind of my perspective on on internships overall. It really gives you kind of that like punch in the mouth of what the real world's like. So,
I like
and
that.
I say that like, no offense to academia, you learn concepts and theories, and that you get hands-on labs or whatever. But, until you're in the middle of like, call it like a war room or like a conference call where you're troubleshooting network down issues.
Yeah.
And especially as an intern, you're just a fly on the wall, right? You kind of just see, you know, bullets flying everywhere per se, and you kind of just take it all in like, oh my God, this is actually pretty intense. And once you get a little bit older, you start figuring out, oh, there's kind of money at stake with that too, right? Like if there's a serious, depending on the business, like you mentioned, an ISP, there's money at stake, right? There's dollars being lost. So it's just more interesting from that perspective. That's, I think, a lot of internships help expose students to.
Yeah, and also when you're an intern, I mean, granted, like, yeah, you're not doing much, but also the expectation for you is a little lower. So they don't really
Mhm.
expect you to, jump on a step one or solve that issue. But
Oh
if you
no.
do, hey, you're like the superstar. They'll be like, oh my God, that intern actually knows a little, of something about this, and or
Yep.
like they could see the enthusiasm. Like you said, I'm sure, I think you brought it up, like cover it really quickly, but I'm sure it was like you try so hard and people could see your work ethic, and perhaps that guy could see it and took it under his wing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. He kind of took me under his wing, and then it was a team of about, I'm gonna say 6 or 7, and everyone had their role. Some were more senior than others, so you learned some things from each one.
Yeah.
And so you learn a little bit about the design, then you learn about how kind of it's implemented. So I mean, a lot of times since the team was so small, I mean, we had, you would have the same engineer design and implement. right? Go on site, connect the cables, make sure everything's working. So that was real interesting as well, because you saw the whole cycle of deploying a network versus, okay, we designed it and then push it downstream. So that was interesting.
Yeah, and that's another issue that's another great point you brought up, right? Besides the internship, you also don't want to, limit yourself on a particular thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the title of network engineer, but it sounded like you went out of your way to learn about other areas as well.
We will pause the programming with a special sponsor message from me, your host, Eric. Hey guys, when it comes to network automation, have you thought about joining a group of like-minded people to ask questions and get the support you need? I would like to invite you to the Network Automation Learning Community. It is free to join and a low-pressure, safe place to post questions, get answers, and just hang out. You can sign up at members.networkautomation.community. The link is also in the show notes. Now, back to regular programming.
Yeah. I mean, with that, I learned about the compute and storage side of the house, right? Because they're the ones that always ask for, hey, can we add this VLAN to this switch, or can we, we want to connect up our equipment to this in the data center. So it was just a natural cohesion with them. So yeah, I got to learn a little bit about their side as well and the dependencies. So yeah, it was a very cool experience and one I'll never forget.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how like the latency and jitter requirements for storage, right? Like that's totally different than at least when I first saw it, it was like, what is this SAN stuff? And it's like,
Oh yeah.
why are you so strict about so and so? And it's almost like networking. They live in their own little world. Like they have a little
Yeah.
bubble, and then they think everything should be a certain way. And then now it's like, hey, I hate to break it to you, but like the package doesn't travel that fast.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So you got your start in networking, and then now that you're in the networking team, so what happened? Like what's between then and now that you've learned, and what are some of the transitions that you've gone through?
Yeah. So the company that I interned with, I actually I had 1 year left of college, finished college, and to this day, I'm grateful for this. Literally, the final month of before I graduated, a junior role opened up with that same team that I interned with,
Oh,
and
nice.
yeah, so um, that was, I don't want to say a shoe in, but I knew most of the people on the team, and that was having that once again making those connections. That's another part of the internship, the social networking side. And so I got the junior role. I got the job offer actually the day before I graduated. It was like I said, the timing was impeccable. And so I started with that company. I was there for a few years. And now, past 2.5 years now, I've been with my current company, Net Craftsman. And between there, learned, like I said, the first experience, that first job, I drank from the fire hose pretty much the whole time. I mean, it was tough, but I learned so much. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Yeah.
And gathered some certifications along the way: CCNA, CCNP, and the DevNet Associate and DevNet Professional. So that's kind of what has happened in between there.
So what's your feeling on certification, right? So as you know, like, and with all the forums, there's like this, I don't want to say debate, but people have
Mhm.
strong opinions about, this is this saved my life, going from this saved my life to like this is just completely useless, right? You should just like
Yeah.
go do stuff. So what's your feeling on that?
Definitely think they are usable. I wouldn't say they're unusable in any way.
Sure.
Uh, the main thing that I think certifications do is provide exposure
Hmm.
to different technologies. And depending on the type of certification or who makes the certification test. So, I mean, more specifically, because most of my certifications are Cisco,
Yeah.
um, Cisco certifications require you to lab up the technology, the exam topic. So you are exposed to it and you also gain experience to it. Or with it, I'm sorry. And that I think is very crucial. Going back to, what we're talking about with the internship, the
Yeah.
biggest thing was the experience. And I
Right.
think any certification that requires you to gain experience with a certain technology, not just oh, I know the answer is A, right? Like it's not just a multiple choice. I studied the book. It's actually really labbing up the gear and the technology. So I think that's what makes certifications valuable.
Yeah, yeah, of course, right? Like, and that goes for multiple other areas, right? Like even for your college degree, like you could be I guess, a paper MBA, or you could be, actually gaining the knowledge, and then, have some application to it, some experience underneath, and so on. But I think the way that people present it, because it's kind of specific and vendor specific, so sometimes a lot of emotions get stirred up. You mentioned Cisco,
Mhm.
and when you say that, people have a certain opinion about
Yeah.
this vendor, and then that kind of bleeds over to the certification, whether then, because sometimes I read about the comments, and I like to get your perspective on that too. It's just like sometimes read the comment, it's like you're just complaining about Cisco. You're not really
Yeah.
talking about certification, the pros and cons, or the validity of it. So I don't know. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to differentiate between who makes the certification and what the
Sure.
certification is about.
Right.
Um, I mean, was before they refreshed the certifications in what was it, 2019? Um,
Yeah, there was like a
the
big change.
Yeah, I for Certpocalypse or whatever they called it. Before that, I tried the old CCNP, and there are definitely some questions that I felt were like almost trick questions, where you're
Mm,
like, okay, are you trying to test my knowledge, or are you trying to like have me solve a riddle, right? So
right.
I can understand, and those were one-offs, right? It's not like the whole test is like that. So removing your emotions from that and looking at the topics at hand. Um, I'll actually use that as a good example, right? So I only took that once. I tried the old, I think it was the route exam, and they had frame relay on it, and some
Oh wow.
right. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I took that too.
yeah. So I made the personal decision where I was like, I'm going to wait until this test is refreshed.
Right.
And it wasn't I think the technology stinks or this test stinks. It was just, there may be a time I run into frame relay,
Yeah.
right? Then there's an off chance, and I'll read through the Cisco docs and I'll have an understanding of it and I'll learn it. But I was like, I know automation and some of these newer practices will be on the updated one,
Yeah.
whenever that is. And lucky enough, it was the following year, 2019. So but that once again, that's a personal decision. I took a step back and said, what do I want to learn, and what do I feel that if I take the certification and pass it, I can confidently talk about, hey, I learned about Ansible, or I learned
Yeah.
about another JSON,
Yeah.
right? I can
Yeah.
talk to this versus, oh yeah, I got a CCNP, I can talk frame relay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Debatable, but that's kind of what a personal decision I took, and I wasn't mad at any other person besides myself at the time. Whenever I failed that first attempt, so
Yeah, you could always look at what a Delcy number is, but
yeah,
what are the chances of you're hitting that 25, formula encapsulation versus, oh, Ansible, or like, definitely. And I like your approach on taking the certification, but keeping one eye on where you want to go and what's happening in the
yeah,
marketplace, right? And then making that educated guess. So, okay, I want to spend most of my effort here versus
yeah.
here.
Yeah, and just to kind of put a final point on that
Yeah.
is I knew I wanted to get my CCNP.
Hmm.
I just, I guess the nice way to put it is I just didn't agree with the current exam topics. And
Sure.
and I will say this, there was kind of rumors at that point, like they were planning to refresh at some point because,
Yeah.
frame relay is pretty, antiquated.
Antique.
Yeah, very antique at that point. So
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'll be patient. I'll wait to see if there's a refresh coming soon.
Yeah.
And then Cisco Live 2019, I think, is when they announced it, and I was like, all right, cool. And so I lined up that and all the DevNet certifications.
Yeah. So you mentioned DevNet, right? So I want to take a step back first and say, because you mentioned network automation, DevNet, and all of these are kind of, within your path. But did you start it out with, like, how did you get your start with network automation in particular? Because, yeah, because that's kind of interesting on how you did it.
Yeah. So it all started with a problem. It
Okay.
always starts with a problem.
Uh,
Um, Not like a personal problem, but it
sure.
was work related where we had to do some task, and it was updating a specific IP address across all
Yep.
of our devices, right?
Right.
And up to that point, we had no automated process. Um, and I was lucky enough to be able to have some time to figure it out. And I actually started with Ansible.
Mm.
And so, I started, the main reason I started with it was I did a little bit of research, but at the time, and this was back in 2018, maybe early 18,
Oh,
and
okay.
Ansible was, it's what everyone was using for anything. You heard network automation at that point, it was Ansible, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, so I started with Ansible. I got a playbook. I figured out how to do like looping and adding some filters, and that's kind of where I started. All due to that one problem that I knew we had to roll out this feature, right? It was a
Yeah.
project, and but we wanted to make sure it was error prone, and we can roll it out over a couple nights versus a couple months. And so that's kind of where it all started. And
Hmm.
since then, after I figured all that out, and when you hit that enter key and watch the Ansible playbook run, and you see like things changed, and then you log into the device and you see it actually did change,
Yeah.
it's like you get hooked. And
Yeah.
then I started going down just pure Python, looking at the Python programming language, figuring out the different automation libraries, I'll call them, like your NetMiko, Napalm, Nornir, and kind of just started from there, and pretty much been on that path ever since.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. On You mentioned you get your start with Ansible, but you quickly move on to Python, right? That's another topic that people have been talking about. Obviously, Ansible itself had gone through many, many changes, starting from this like maybe just this project, and then quickly evolving to a company, and then got bought by Red Hat, and then Red Hat got bought by IBM. So, what's your, I guess, at what point did you switch from Ansible to Python, and what was your reason?
Uh, so there wasn't like a lot of and I totally agree. There's definitely conversations about what's better, when to use what tool. Obviously, I think it, as every network engineer says, it depends, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The reason I switched was I just wanted to learn Python. I wanted to
Okay.
learn. I like programming. I did a lot of programming classes in college, Java, PHP. Right. I like the constructs of a programming language. So I started learning Python, and then I found I believe NetMiko was the very first library I found,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
saw how easy it was to
Yeah,
interact with a network device.
yeah,
And then you quickly learn, oh, and I have the whole power of the all the Python libraries and frameworks out there to
yeah,
go with this.
yeah.
um, you quickly learn like you're not really limited to any sort of DSL or framework. So that's kind of the reason I switched, was I just wanted to learn something new, and then I found my freedom through using Python versus Ansible.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I was half expecting like, okay, I need to like write Ansible playbooks, and then now there's like a module that I wasn't or a plugin that wasn't available, so I need to really write my own custom module or whatnot. So that's where you discover Python. But so it's kind of interesting. You just say, okay, I want to learn something new because that was Ansible and Python. Now I know Ansible, and I want to know Python. So that's kind of fun to hear different approaches to your learning path.
Yeah, and like one final note about about Ansible specifically, I think it's a great way and a great tool to use. Actually, when I was doing kind of my own labbing and stuff, using Ansible in a CI/CD pipeline to deploy changes, and
Yep.
it's once you figure out like, oh, I just have to change this one YAML file and then commit my changes to a repository, and then everything kicks off automatically. Run playbooks against a lab network, verify the changes, and then you just have to click a button that says, "Yep, go ahead and run it against the production network." Right?
Yeah.
Like once you start connecting all the dots of network automation, I mean, Ansible is definitely has its place for sure. But yeah, Python, there's just, and we could talk about it a little later, but some personal projects I've built using Python, it's just they're impossible to you couldn't do it with Ansible, right? But
Yeah.
every tool has its place.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm the same way. It's like if you I guess people talk about like the purity or like the scalability of different tools. And but if a tool like, for example, Ansible Playbook or module that fits your needs right there within that scope, why not just leverage that? And you could see from some of the courses I publish on LinkedIn Learning or some else places, that's what I do too. It's like if this tool fits all of your needs, why spend that time, reinvent the wheel, just go use it, versus okay, now that I need something customizable, now that it exceeded its capability, then you're faced with the agenda of whether I enhance this tool or I go out and find something else and build it myself, for example. So I like that approach very much.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of the interview with Denny. Stay tuned next week for part 2 of the interview where Denny discusses his DevNet exam study journey. See you there.